this again goes back to what I said earlier without sounding like a broken record. It's very tough, I think, from my perspective, to look at any of these pieces of legislation in isolation. There really is a comprehensive approach to this.
So Dale, when you look at the package of reforms passed this year, is it up to the districts to take those and create impacts, or are some of these things going to happen even if a district, say, isn't interested in following what the state's done?
Well, sure. When you're talking about, I think, 300 plus school corporations across the state, the rate of implementation of things is certainly going to vary. And I think when you're considering such a large group, you definitely will have, I would imagine, some corporations that won't be as eager to embrace some of these ideas. But I think also on the flip side, you are going to have corporations that take advantage of. It's funny because we were just talking about this morning at the state board meeting, and one of the state board members talked about this in the context. The term he used was it's a new day. Some will look at the new day and go, whatever. But others will say, you know what, it is a new day. I want to take advantage of this. And Dr. Bennett always uses the idea of, he uses the term centers of innovation, driving these decisions to the local level. And I think the hope is that, with time, you're going to see corporations that take advantage of the new environment, really push that through its threshold, hopefully realize greater results for students. And that in itself will serve as a model for other corporations across the state.
It's a really important question. I think it's really incumbent upon the community to come together and make sure that the districts are taking advantage of this freedom. So in 1995, a law was passed that basically did what Senate Bill 575 does, just for IPS, limited collective bargaining to wages and benefits, and not a lot changed. And so that law ended up getting repealed in exchange for the charter school law because it wasn't having an effect because the district wasn't taking advantage of that freedom. I think it's a very different leadership in IPS right now, so I think there's going to be a very different reaction in IPS because of Dr. White's leadership. But I think it's important as we look at districts around the city and around the state to make sure that they are taking advantage of these freedoms to really make sure that they're doing what's best for kids.
Dr. White, I've asked you this question before, and you've answered provocatively, I think. What would you say the percentage of teachers in your district is that the percentage of underperforming teachers in your district, and are these new laws going to help you do a full-scale cleaning out of those teachers?
Matt, I really do think that it will, because in the last 2 years we've had an aggressive campaign at improving instruction in the classroom, and like I've always said, the teachers union, it gets a bad rap on creating ineffective teachers. That's just not true. Ineffective teachers or bad teachers are created by administrators who don't effectively supervise and evaluate teachers. We have aggressively gone after improving supervision and evaluation. In the last 2 years, we've removed more teachers than we have in the last 20 years from IPS, but this law will help us to expedite that. And also, the law will allow us, if we should have to reduce staff, reduce our teaching force, then we will reduce those who are less able to effectively teach children, as opposed to, like Doe said, last in, first out. It really will be about effectiveness and efficiency. We work with our teachers association, and right now, once we have this reduction in force, like we are reducing about 357 teachers overall in IPS, the callback when we have to get those teachers back, we have a process that we don't bring them back by seniority. We bring them back based on their efficiency rating that we have in the district. So we've already, unfortunately, we didn't do it on the front end, we're doing it on the back end now, where you don't come back unless you're proficient or higher. Anyone who's deficient or below average will not get back. But now on the front end, we can say only those people who are proficient will have a chance even to stay in the district. And that will be a tremendous change, because I think when you asked me that question before, I said about 60% of our teachers we're definitely ready to stay there, and about 40% we could lose and change over. I really do believe that we're working effectively on that number, and I think the new law will help us to do even more. What I've found is that teachers like Teresa and teachers like Ann Wilkins, who's the president of the IEA, they don't like to have colleagues who are hurting kids in the classroom because it's a bad reflection on everyone. And like David says, the research is very clear about the damage that one bad teacher can do, but two bad teachers in a row can really demolish a kid's educational career. And three, it's hard to recover from three. But on the other hand, the research is very clear on what three good teachers in a row can do for a child too, in terms of overcoming obstacles and what have you. So we know, and we believe, like David said in his introductory comments, the most important person in the whole scenario for education is that classroom teacher. And if we can get that right, it covers up for a lot of mistakes that politicians make, that administrators make, and parents make. It really does. And so that's one reason we're excited about the 575 law.
Yeah, we have a question in the audience.
Yeah, I have a question about 2014 and with my understanding about the No Child Left Behind, or either that schools have to perform at 100% for ISTEP or for the standardized testing.
By 2014?
Yeah.
That is the No Child Left Behind law, but that law is a part of the Elementary Secondary Education Act, and they have to get, they've been trying to go in to change that particular law for the last 3 years, and it doesn't appear they're going to get it done this year either. But they know eventually, if your school has any diversity, and if your school has just normal children in it, by 2014, you're not going to have every kid making 100% on math and language arts. And it really does get that ridiculous, because every 3 years in Indiana, and Del can correct me on this, we raise the passing score. We're almost to 80% passing now, that you have to get 80% to pass the test. And eventually, if we don't change this law, it will eventually get to 100% by 2014. Now, people recognize that that's a problem, and they're trying to do something about it, but until they change that in D.C., it's going to be a problem unless the U.S. Department of Education stop enforcing that particular area of the law and indicate to the state departments of education to stop that enforcement. If they don't, last year, no high school, well, only one high school in Marion County made AYP last year. And that's not going to get better, it's going to get worse, because next year, I think, the cut score goes up higher.
So my question is, so, who wins and who loses, right? And we can agree that everyone loses if that is, if that's the standard for 2014, and every year going higher, so maybe by 2013, we're saying 90%. Meanwhile, we have students in classes, in schools who basically hear from Star, from the news, well, we failed again. Basically what they say is that school's a failure. They'll be put on probation. So how do the students, parents, and community, when we look at that and we go, okay, well, this is a failing school, that's psychological abuse for something that's not even possible. You can't have 100% at anything.
If I could comment on that, certainly I think Dr. White is absolutely right that one of the challenges here is this, a lot of this is tied into ESEA reauthorization, right? And of course, when you look back at ESEA, when it was passed back, I think in the mid-'60s under LBJ, the original intent was for Congress to reauthorize it every 5 years. Now, of course, ever since the mid-'60s, Congress has never hit that 5-year renewal timeline, surprisingly. But that said, to piggyback off what Dr. White just said, here in Indiana, as well as a number of states, I think, are going to be in the process of looking at seeking waivers from some of the provisions in No Child Left Behind, and actually, if you look at, and we feel pretty good about the possibility of that, because if you look at our U.S. Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, if you look at what he did previously to joining before Obama tapped him, he was actually the head of schools in Chicago, and when he was in Chicago, he was known for frequently asking the feds for waivers. So we feel like this shouldn't be unusual from the feds' perspective. Now, in terms of the psychological issue you were talking about, right now, one of the things that's very confusing about school accountability in Indiana is that there's two accountability tracks, right? One, there is a federal track, which is No Child Left Behind, the 100% proficiency in 2014. And then there is the state accountability track, Public Law 221, which Teresa mentioned earlier in our conversation. And what we're in the process of doing now in terms of changing and improving the state accountability track is that we are going to, the State Board has already approved, removing the NCLB, AYP federal accountability from the state accountability. And so what does that mean? Well, right now, if you look at the old system, if your school does not make AYP, the federal accountability provision, as a school corporation, you're capped in terms of how well you can do under the state system. And that's always been one of the biggest complaints we've heard from corporations. I mean, for instance, one of the biggest reasons why schools aren't making AYP, which is what Dr. White was talking about, one of the biggest reasons is this subgroup idea. And so for those of you who are not familiar with this, there are 30 different subgroup categories, whether it's special ed, African American, all these various categories. And if a school misses just in one of those subgroups, they actually don't make AYP. And that's one of the biggest things from superintendents, teachers across the state, that's just not fair. Right now, if you look at it, there's 30 different subgroups that exist. One kid can actually count against a school corporation over 20 times, or over those 20 of those subgroups. And it's a system that really is just, honestly, it's really behind the times. And so now what we're going to do is, in terms of Public Law 221, is we're going to revamp the system so that AYP piece doesn't factor in, and then also we're going to ask the feds for a waiver so that the provisions we're setting up in the revised, improved Public Law 221 fulfill the AYP requirements without having some of the problems that I think a number of states are facing now as we get closer to the 2014 timeline.
Thanks. I think we're down to the last question, so maybe if each of you could take a minute on this final question. Should we be happy with what passed this year and focus on implementing that and let the debate fade for a while? Or should we come back next year and have another debate about more steps that we want to take in education reform? And if so, what should those be? I'll start with Teresa and work our way down.
Well, I think we need to pay attention to what's happening in the next year, and we need to be ready to revise and redo portions of this that are not working, and champion the pieces that are going to work. The one big piece that I think folks have a false perception of in the legislation that just passed surrounding education is that there's more local control. What I would argue that there is not. You have local control so long as it meets the state requirements. And if it does not, you risk losing your state or federal dollars. You could have an incredible teacher evaluation system, but at some point there is a deadline, and if it does not fit what the State Board of Education now will have, they'll have to take a look at it, and if it doesn't fit all of the components that it is in the law, that are laid out in the law, you're not going to be in compliance. The same goes for a salary schedule, I believe, that is also a part of that evaluation system. So to say that there's a lot more community control and there's going to be more dialogue in the community level to make decisions, I'm not sure about. I think the verdict's still out on that, and I wouldn't get too excited about that just yet. So stay tuned.
Dr. White?
One of the things that you learn after you've been in this business a while, that you should never rush to judgment on anything. The paper is still not cool from the letters that they're putting on it from the new laws, and we just don't know yet. I think we have, for instance, I told you that I favor 575, the collective bargaining piece. On the other hand, I'm very concerned about the voucher piece. I'm very concerned, like what Teresa said, that 18% of my school populations, my fastest growing population is Hispanic Latino, and they cut money for my ELL instruction. That doesn't make sense. It's like those kids don't exist. So there are many things like that in this law